you're a vintage Seiko collector and you have ever gone down that rabbit hole of trying to find a MACV-SOG watch, you probably researched many different sites, read through many articles and forum posts, then scoured the internet searching for the increasingly difficult to find reference 6619-8060 or one like it. What you're looking at in my hand right now is not that reference. This is a 6106-8217. And before I get too far, and before I offend any SOG Seiko collectors that has an original 6619-8060 or other variant, let me just state that I personally believe this is not an actual MACV-SOG watch. But that hasn't stopped me from loving this piece, and I'll tell you why throughout the course of this video. There are so many enthusiasts and collectors before me that have done a majority of the research of these beautiful timepieces, so if you're ever interested in searching for a Seiko MACV-SOG, I'm going to list many sites and podcasts in the description of this video so you can reference at your leisure. And I want to give a special thanks to all those before me that have done so much of the legwork. Also, if you have comments or corrections to add, which I'm sure there will be, just jump down in the comments section below. Also note, I'm a collector and I'm an enthusiast. I'm certainly certain there will be things that I miss and perhaps things that you may not see as I said correctly. If so, beg my pardon in advance and let me know down below. Also, while you're typing away, please feel free to like this video and subscribe while you're down there. All right, so let's talk about what a Seiko MACV-SOG watch is. So years ago, there was a book published called Running Recon, a photo journey with SOG special ops along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And in this book, it referenced the Seiko 6619-8060 as being a watch that was issued to members of the Military Assistant Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group, or SOG. Now, from what I read, this group was a special operations group comprised of members from different branches of the U.S. military to run reconnaissance operations and such. The watches that this unit wanted for its members were sterile ones. Now, in other words, watches that were not associated with the U.S. military in case they were captured or killed in combat. I won't do justice to all the history here, so I highly recommend you dig into some of the reference sites and listen to the podcast yourself. Anyway, most were Army Special Forces like Green Berets, but apparently there were other branches like Marines, Force Recon members that were attached to this group. Myself, being a former Marine infantryman and a combat veteran, but most importantly, a watch enthusiast, well, you can understand how my personal infatuation started with the SOG Seikos. I mean, I love Seiko watches. So it was only going to be a matter of time before I hunted one down and found one for my own personal collection. Now, finding a MACV-SOG is very difficult to do these days, especially when you're searching for one that's in good condition, but also not ridiculously priced as well. Obviously, over the last 20 years since the book was published, and by the way, used copies on Amazon of that book are about $400 in 2024. Anyway, the lore of Seikos being used by Vietnam vets in covert operations in the jungle, and then it's fueled by movies like Apocalypse Now and Captain Willard, that's played by Hollywood heavyweight Martin Sheen. That's only added fuel to the fire of Seiko collectors around the globe. Prices have skyrocketed over the years, and it's only a matter of time before Seiko releases a limited edition official MACV-SOG reissue, especially with the popularity and current trends of sub 40 millimeter watches that's currently going on right now. Anyway, I came across this one that I have in my hand recently, and it was so beautiful. And it was so appropriately priced that I couldn't pass it up, knowing well and good that this probably wasn't a reference number attached to these SOG units. However, as you can see next to this 6119-8060, they look very similar. Also, I should mention there are a few other references that are also considered SOG issued watches, like the 6119-8100, 6119-8101, 6119-8090 as well. The differences that you'll notice between these references might be a slight change on the dial from the Seiko 5 logo to having Sportsmatic on the dial. There's also accounts of a reference 7005-8030, which was more of a cushion case model. The differences that you will notice with the original SOG watches is the case material was not all stainless steel, but were chrome plated and had an inferior movement to the model that I have in my hand. If I'm not mistaken, the 7005-8030 was also all stainless steel. Like I said, if I'm not mistaken. This one that I have, the 6106-8219 DX model, is housed in an all stainless steel case, but it also has an upgraded movement with hacking. You can also see that on the dial, there's a raised Seiko and DX logo, but the dial itself shares the same characteristics as the original SOG watches. They have that beautiful gray-brown sunburst metallic dial. And it's the same sunburst dial you're going to find on the original 62 MAS, which, by the way, I owned one about 10 years ago, one of the original 62 MAS. And that is one of the main characteristics of the SOG watches. Also, the very large and legible loomed Arabic numerals on the dial that absolutely made these watches extremely legible in low light conditions, especially during the Vietnam era. There are references in the book to the luminescence being almost too bright for night operations because of how they glowed after dark. One of the other major differences of the model that I have in my hand in the original MACV-SOG watches is the case itself. As I mentioned, the case material for the original references are not all stainless steel. A lot of the ones that you'll find on the market have some corrosion to the steel-plated cases. And also, another big difference that you'll notice from the original references, that they had snap-on case backs. The DX model was obviously a more premium model with all the stainless steel case, hacking secondhand, but it also had a screw-on case back. And from what I read, the DX models were probably civilian models that came on bracelets versus the original SOG watches that came on inexpensive Tropic straps. And this is probably the reason why many of the ones that I've seen of the DX dials are so well preserved, like the one that I have in my hand right now. It's beautiful. One of the other things that you're going to notice about the case is the lugs are a little different as well. The lugs are stubbier on this DX model, and there's this bevel on the inside of the lug, almost like you would find on an older 70s Omega watch. So let's talk about the dimensions of the SOG Seikos. Now keep in mind that even though the case looks very slightly different, the diameters are the same as the original SOG references, and they should wear exactly the same as this one that I have here. The watch is 36 millimeters in diameter. Lug to lug is 41 millimeters. The watch itself is 11 millimeters thick, but that's including the domed acrylic crystal. It actually wears more like an 8 or 9 millimeter thick watch. The watch does have 19 millimeter lug openings, and as you can see on my watch, I've actually fitted it with this Hodinkee two-piece Admiral Gray nylon strap, which I think captures the essence of the watch. If you look closely at the dial, you'll notice that the lume has patinaed quite nicely to this beautiful sugar cookie color or cream color, and you'll notice that the lume is still present and raised slightly off the dial. Like the other references, the day and date window is framed, and the date is quickset by pressing in the crown. But what I found, the only way to change the actual day is to just keep moving the hands around until you get to the correct day. Now, if you're listening in and you know of a shortcut here, please jump in the comments below and let us all know. I mentioned earlier the DX model that I have in hand features an applied Seiko logo just below the 12 o'clock numeral, and it has an applied DX logo just above the 6 o'clock numeral. The applied logos are obviously a characteristic of the more premium DX lineup of that time. The handset on this reference is the same for all the SOG watches too. Now, if you flip the watch over, this case back is screw down. And like I said earlier, the other references had a snap-on case back. Like many vintage Seikos, the case back engraving is wearing thin and getting more difficult to read as the years go on, but you can clearly see this model in hand is a July 1970 watch, which is just a couple years older than me. If you want to know how one of these watches wear on the wrist, I have a 7¼ inch wrist, and the 36mm case size, it wears very nicely on the wrist because these watches are basically all dial. And the large and beautiful Arabic numerals help give these watches a very nice presence on your wrist. Yet, the watch is small enough and it's slim enough to slip under any cuff, even with my 2-piece nylon strap. Now, if you have any interest in these wonderful pieces of military history, I suggest you visit a couple sites that I've also linked in the description of this video. Fratello did a really nice write-up on the original 6619-8060. And one of my favorite watch podcasts is the Two Broke Watch Snobs podcast, and they did a special interview and an episode of military watches. I linked that below as well. Also, the watch site, which is a Seiko and Citizen watch forum, has endless amounts of posts from enthusiasts and collectors around the globe of these beautiful timepieces. I linked the thread below as well. My favorite site is watchesofespionage.com. Watchesofespionage.com has articles on the SOG watches, and it even has a story of how the 6106-8100, the non-Arabic dial with a bezel, has been used in SOG operations too. If you are a military or a government agency watch enthusiast like myself, make sure you join their email list. It's free to do. The editor at Watches of Espionage will put out some amazingly researched articles quite frequently. And check out this WOE or Watches of Espionage strap that I have. Even though this watch strap is 20mm and it doesn't fit my SOG watch due to the 19mm lug width, I wear this strap frequently on my Persista military watches. The strap was made exclusively for Watches of Espionage by Zulu Alpha Straps. I have reviewed them on my channel before. These straps are of the highest quality and I highly recommend them. Now, being a Seiko enthusiast and a collector of many Seikos in my own personal collection, do you think it bothers me that this watch is not considered to be an actual Seiko SOG watch? No, not at all. For me, this watch captures the essence of the original SOG watches. And it's on my wrist, not anybody else's wrist. And I personally think it's beautiful. Now, will I seek out an original 6619-8060 or one of the other references? You bet. I'm a collector at heart. I'll be on the hunt for the best example I can find in the years ahead. Well, if you made it this far, let me introduce myself. My name is Blake, and as you can tell, I'm a bit of a watchaholic. And I figured if you made it this far, you're a bit of a watchaholic too. So I want to thank you for spending your time with me. I know it's your most valuable asset, so I do appreciate it. I'll see you in the next video.